Hello, thanks for choosing my video, and I hope you learned something useful and can leave me a good comment today. Here is the presentation. Natasha Trethewey's history lesson, a poetic time capsule, you could say. First, let's talk about Natasha herself. She was born in 1966 in Gulfport, Mississippi. She's the daughter of a mixed-race marriage between poet Eric Trethewey and social worker Gwendolyn Ann Turnbow. She grew up in Atlanta, Georgia with her mother and New Orleans, Louisiana with her father, going back and forth. She went to Hollins University for her Master of Arts and the University of Massachusetts for her Master of Fine Arts. And she's the author of 5 poetry collections and hopefully more to come. So here is the poem History Lesson by Natasha Trethewey. History lesson. I am 4 in this photograph, standing on a wide strip of Mississippi beach, my hands on the flowered hips of a bright bikini. My toes dug in, curl around wet sand. The sun cuts the rippling gulf in flashes with each tidal rush. Minnows dart at my feet, glinting like switchblades. I am alone except for my grandmother, other side of the camera, telling me how to pose. It is 1970, 2 years after they opened the rest of this beach to us, 40 years since the photograph where she stood on a narrow pot of sand marked colored, smiling, her hands on the flowered hips of a cotton meal sack dress. So here is an introduction to history lesson. Obviously, it's about a beach in Mississippi. The time periods are 1970, but also 1930. There's nostalgia of personal memories and a photo, or two. References to herself and her grandmother are made. And it starts with imagery and turns to a lesson. So what is that lesson? What are we learning about history? There are themes of past racial segregation and how the times have changed. Let's look at the poem again. History lesson is broken up into 6 stanzas, and each one of those being a 3-line tercet or triplet, except for the 6th stanza being a 2-lined unrhymed couplet. This poem is a free verse poem. Now let's go over what the poem entails. When Natasha was a young child, a photograph was taken of her on the beach wearing a bikini and having a lovely time on the senseful, beautiful beach. Her grandmother is taking the photo and preparing to recreate a pose of the same photo from 40 years previously, that is, of herself. It is shown how her grandmother was on the segregated side for people of color, separated from the white side, and wearing what was not exactly a swimsuit for the beach. The times have changed for the better, and it is photographic evidence. The overall themed lesson is to talk of how racism in the past decades of America caused for segregation in the most open and fun spaces of the country, even a beach. Now let's talk about the imagery, but let's start with the happy imagery. From the beginning first half of the poem, we can see the strong, beautiful imagery, but once the second half starts, there is a huge tone shift from the safe, happy feeling of the start to the heavy feeling segregation ideas of the second half. The switch in the middle starts with the word I, from I am alone. Same for the start of the first section of the poem, it also starts with I am 4. Since the poem overall is about the author Natasha, it makes sense to start with I. But when we transition into the other meaning, the I brings out how it is still about her, almost like a reminder, but a reminder when things are taking a darker turn. The contrasting imagery mixed with the nostalgic tones lead for a somber atmosphere of understanding. The contrast is the visual comparisons between the bikini being worn and the dress that the grandmother wore, an obvious difference of the times. But having the sign that says colored is a very meaningful and shows the depth of the poem. Now let's look at the highlighted parts here. These are important factors of imagery. You'll envision the photograph there, and standing on a wide strip of the Mississippi beach, you'll see the beach. And why is it wide? That is very important, actually, to detail. This adjective brings about the idea that now the beach is completely free and is large. It is a large, beautiful beach, open to all. Hands on the flowered hips of a bright bikini. It is a very bright bikini, much different than the cotton sack dress that the grandmother had worn. The toes digging in the wet sand. The sun, very bright, and envision. And the rippling gulf and the tidal rush. And you can see those minnows and they're darting. And then the grandmother there by her side. All of that is a beautiful compilation of imagery. Let's talk about the figurative language and some more imagery. Some more imagery would be the narrow plot of sand now. It is narrow instead of the wide beach previously. The grandmother was put only in the color marked section, which was so small, but now it is a wide beach for all to be allowed. And we can also see her smiling, her hands again on those flowered hips, this time of the cotton meal sack dress, which was, we said, the opposite of that bright bikini. Now let's talk about the figurative language. Trethewey uses figurative language throughout the first few stanzas to really capture the beautiful imagery. She uses an example of personification when referring to the sun. The sun cuts the rippling gulf in flashes with each tidal rush. The sun does not actually cut the gulf, but this allows us to imagine the visuals occurring with the waves in the sunlight. She also uses an interesting simile with the minnows below that. Minnows dart at my feet, glinting like switchblades. The minnows are making darting movements, but are not literal switchblades. They are fish. This just helps compare the unlike items of a fish and a blade to be doing the same action of slicing at her feet with such speed that it feels sharp to her. Natasha's grandmother might have also been alluding to that typical thing where you'll take the child and when they grow up, retake the photo in the same outfit or the same location because it's cute and nostalgic, right? Or when families will do the grandchild photo to the grandparent. But it was also meant to teach that lesson of how there were the differences. It's a neat way of going about it. Conclusion on history lesson. It is a free verse poem that tells a story while teaching a lesson of history. Natasha is grateful for her grandmother for withstanding the hate of the past and pushing forward towards the future so that now she can grow up and live in a better world. She understands and wants to make known the differences and the changes that have been made and how proud she is to be who she is. Trethewey is reflecting on her past in comparison to her grandmother's and is speaking to the reader about this history and teaching everyone a lesson. Allow me to read the poem one last time for you. History lesson. I am 4 in this photograph, standing on a wide strip of Mississippi beach, my hands on the flowered hips of a bright bikini. My toes dug in, curl around wet sand. The sun cuts the rippling gulf in flashes with each tidal rush. Minnows dart at my feet, glinting like switchblades. I am alone except for my grandmother, other side of the camera, telling me how to pose. It is 1970, 2 years after they opened the rest of the speech to us, 40 years since the photograph where she stood on a narrow plot of sand marked colored, smiling, her hands on the flowered hips of a cotton meal sack dress. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my explication of History Lesson by Natasha Trethewey. Thanks.